Sarah Whitfield had always been a woman of routine. Every morning, she woke up at 6 a.m., brewed a cup of coffee, and sat on the porch of her modest home in the quiet town of Silverton, nestled in the hills of Northern California. Her life, though not extravagant, was fulfilling. Hello. Welcome. Enjoy, subscribe, and activate notifications. Sarah worked as a librarian at the town's small library, a job she had held for over a decade. She knew every book on the shelves, every crack in the walls of the old building, and most importantly, every person who walked through its doors. Silverton was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone else. The sense of community was strong, and Sarah was at the heart of it. She organized book clubs, helped children with their homework, and always had a kind word for those who needed it. Her home, a small cottage on the edge of town, was her sanctuary. It was where she had raised her two children, Emily and Jacob, who were now grown and living in different states. The walls of the cottage were lined with memories, photographs of family vacations, mementos from her children's school projects, and books, so many books. But life, as Sarah knew it, was about to change in ways she could never have imagined. The summer of 2024 had been unusually warm. The heat was oppressive, and the air seemed to hang heavy with a sense of foreboding. The news had been filled with reports of wildfires raging across California, but Silverton had always been spared. It was a town surrounded by dense forests, and the locals had always believed that the hills and the Silver River would protect them. One August evening, as Sarah was closing up the library, she noticed the sky to the west had taken on an ominous orange hue. The sun, usually so bright and comforting, was obscured by a thick layer of smoke. Sarah's heart skipped a beat, but she quickly pushed her anxiety aside. Wildfires were a reality of living in California, but Silverton had never been in their path. As she locked the library doors and walked home, the smell of smoke became stronger. The usual chatter of birds was replaced by an eerie silence, broken only by the distant wail of sirens. Sarah quickened her pace, a sense of unease settling in her chest. When she arrived home, she found a message on her answering machine. It was from her daughter, Emily, who lived in San Francisco. "Mom, I've been hearing about the fires near you. Are you okay? Please call me as soon as you get this." Sarah immediately picked up the phone and dialed Emily's number. "Mom, thank God you're okay. I've been so worried. The news is saying there's a massive fire heading towards Silverton." Sarah's heart pounded. "I saw the smoke, but I didn't realize it was that close." "I'll be fine, Em. I'm sure the firefighters will contain it before it gets here. Please, Mom, don't take any chances. Pack a bag and get ready to leave if you have to." Sarah promised she would, but as she hung up the phone, she couldn't shake the feeling that this time was different. The night passed fitfully. Sarah tossed and turned, her mind racing with thoughts of what she would do if the fire reached Silverton. She couldn't bear the thought of losing her home, the place where so many memories were made. By dawn, the smoke had thickened, and the sound of helicopters echoed through the valley. The news confirmed her worst fears. The fire was spreading rapidly, and Silverton was in its path. Sarah spent the morning packing a few essentials: family photos, important documents, and a couple of changes of clothes. She walked through her home, touching the walls as if to memorize every detail. When she reached the small bookshelf in her bedroom, she hesitated. The books were old friends, companions through good times and bad. She couldn't take them all, but she carefully selected a few favorites and placed them in her bag. Just as she was about to leave, there was a knock on the door. It was her neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, an elderly woman who had lived next door for as long as Sarah could remember. "Sarah, dear, have you heard? They're telling us to evacuate. The fire is getting closer." Sarah nodded, her throat tight. "I know. I was just about to leave. Do you need help packing?" Mrs. Jenkins shook her head. "I've packed what I can, but I'm scared, Sarah. I've never had to leave my home before." Sarah took her hand, squeezing it gently. "We'll get through this together. Let's head to the community center. They've set up a shelter there." The two women left their homes, glancing back only once as they walked down the street. The air was thick with smoke, and the sky was a deep, unnatural orange. Other neighbors were also leaving, some in cars, others on foot. The normally peaceful town was filled with a sense of urgency and fear. At the community center, the atmosphere was tense. Families huddled together, anxiously watching the news updates on a small television. Sarah found a spot near the back and sat down, pulling Mrs. Jenkins close. They spent the next few hours in silence, each lost in their thoughts. As night fell, the news grew more dire. The fire was out of control, and it had reached the outskirts of Silverton. Sarah's heart sank as she realized that her home, her beloved cottage, was in its path. Around midnight, a firefighter entered the community center. His face was grim as he addressed the crowd. "I'm sorry to have to tell you this, but the fire has reached Silverton. Many homes have already been destroyed. We're doing everything we can to contain it, but the situation is critical. If anyone needs a place to stay, we're arranging transport to shelters in the next town." Sarah felt as though the ground had been pulled out from under her. The room seemed to spin, and she gripped Mrs. Jenkins' hand for support. Her home, the place where she had built her life, was gone. The night passed in a blur of tears and disbelief. By morning, the fire had been contained, but the damage was done. Silverton, the town that had always been her safe haven, was a charred ruin. The morning after the fire, the once vibrant town of Silverton lay under a thick blanket of ash. The air was heavy with the acrid smell of burnt wood and charred memories. Sarah stood in front of what had once been her home, now reduced to a smoldering pile of rubble. The familiar sight of her cottage, with its white picket fence and flower beds, was gone. All that remained were the blackened remnants of a life that had taken years to build. She could hardly believe it. The home where she had raised her children, where she had celebrated birthdays and holidays, was no more. The reality of the loss was overwhelming, and for a moment, Sarah felt as though she might collapse under the weight of it all. But as she stood there, gazing at the ruins, a sense of determination began to grow within her. The fire had taken her home, but it had not taken her spirit. Sarah took a deep breath and wiped away the tears that had begun to fall. There was work to be done. She wasn't the only one who had lost everything. The entire town had been devastated. As she looked around, she saw neighbors sifting through the debris of their own homes, searching for anything that might have survived the inferno. The sense of community that had always defined Silverton was now more important than ever. She turned to Mrs. Jenkins, who stood silently beside her, clutching a small handbag that contained all she had managed to save. "We're going to get through this," Sarah said softly. "We've lost our homes, but we haven't lost each other. That's what matters most." Mrs. Jenkins nodded, her eyes filled with tears. "I don't know where to start, Sarah. I'm so lost." "We'll start by helping each other," Sarah replied, placing a comforting hand on the older woman's shoulder. "Let's go find the others and see what we can do." As they made their way through the town, Sarah was struck by the sheer scale of the destruction. Homes that had stood for generations were now nothing more than piles of ash and twisted metal. The town's beloved library, where Sarah had spent countless hours surrounded by books, was a charred shell. The roof had collapsed, and the walls were blackened. But in her mind's eye, she could still see the rows of books, the cozy reading nooks, the children's corner where she had read stories to wide-eyed youngsters. Her heart ached at the loss, but she forced herself to keep moving. There would be time to grieve later. Right now, the town needed to come together. At the community center, which had miraculously survived the fire, people were beginning to gather. The atmosphere was somber, but there was also a sense of resolve in the air. Silverton had always been a close-knit community, and in this moment of crisis, that bond was more important than ever. Sarah immediately set to work. She organized a group to begin clearing debris, while another group started collecting donations of food, clothing, and other essentials from neighboring towns. She knew it was going to be a long and difficult road to recovery, but she was determined to help lead her community through it. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, the people of Silverton began to rebuild. The physical scars of the fire were everywhere, but there was a renewed sense of purpose in the town. Neighbors helped neighbors, and the spirit of resilience that had always been a part of Silverton now shone brighter than ever. Sarah threw herself into the work. She spent her days helping others clear their properties, coordinating donations, and providing a shoulder to cry on for those who needed it. At night, she would return to the community center, where she had set up a makeshift living space for herself and Mrs. Jenkins. The exhaustion was overwhelming, but so was the sense of accomplishment. Despite the devastation, they were making progress. Slowly but surely, they were rebuilding their lives. But as the weeks went on, Sarah began to feel the weight of her own loss more acutely. She had been so focused on helping others that she hadn't taken the time to truly process what she had lost. The memories of her home, the life she had built there, haunted her. She found herself waking up in the middle of the night, her mind racing with thoughts of the past. One evening, after a particularly long day of work, Sarah sat outside the community center, staring up at the stars. The night was clear, and the sky was a deep, velvety black, dotted with countless stars. It was a beautiful sight, one that had always brought her comfort. But tonight, the beauty of the stars only served to remind her of all she had lost. She felt a tear slip down her cheek, followed by another, until she was quietly sobbing, her shoulders shaking with the force of her grief. For weeks, she had held it all in, putting on a brave face for the sake of her community. But now, in the stillness of the night, she finally allowed herself to mourn. As she cried, she felt a presence beside her. It was Mrs. Jenkins, who had come out to check on her. "Oh, Sarah," Mrs. Jenkins said softly, sitting down beside her. "You've been so strong for all of us. It's okay to let it out." Sarah nodded, unable to speak through her tears. Mrs. Jenkins put an arm around her and held her as she cried, offering the comfort that Sarah had so freely given to others. "I don't know how to start over," Sarah finally whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Everything I had, everything I worked for, it's all gone." Mrs. Jenkins squeezed her shoulder. "You've already started, Sarah. Look at what you've done for this town. You've helped all of us begin to rebuild. And you're not alone. We're all in this together." Sarah took a deep breath and wiped her eyes. She knew Mrs. Jenkins was right. She wasn't alone. And as long as she had her community, she could find the strength to rebuild her life, one step at a time. In the weeks that followed, Sarah continued to dedicate herself to the recovery efforts in Silverton. The town was slowly coming back to life. Families were starting to rebuild their homes. Businesses were reopening, and the library was being reconstructed with donations from across the state. The outpouring of support from neighboring communities and even strangers had been overwhelming, and it gave Sarah hope that Silverton would not just survive, but thrive again. However, as the immediate crisis passed and the town settled into the long, slow process of rebuilding, Sarah found herself at a crossroads. Her home was gone, and though she had poured her heart into helping others, she hadn't yet taken the time to think about what she wanted for her own future. One morning, as she was organizing volunteers at the community center, a familiar face walked through the door. It was Emily, her daughter, who had flown in from San Francisco. "Mom," Emily called out, rushing over to embrace her. "Emily, oh, sweetheart, what are you doing here?" Sarah asked, surprised and overjoyed to see her. "I had to come. I've been so worried about you, and I wanted to help," Emily replied, holding her mother tightly. Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. Having Emily there gave her the strength she didn't realize she needed. Together, they spent the day working side by side, helping those in need and catching up on each other's lives. That evening, after everyone else had left, Sarah and Emily sat together in the quiet of the community center. The exhaustion of the day had settled in, but there was also a sense of peace in being together. "Mom, have you thought about what you want to do next?" Emily asked gently. Sarah sighed and looked down at her hands. "Honestly, I haven't. I've been so focused on helping everyone else that I haven't taken the time to think about myself." Emily nodded, understanding. "You've always been the one to take care of everyone else. But it's okay to take care of yourself too, Mom. You don't have to do it all alone." Sarah smiled softly, grateful for her daughter's words. "I know. I'm not sure where to start." Emily reached out and took her mother's hand. "Let's start by figuring out what makes you happy. What do you want, Mom? Not just for Silverton, but for yourself?" Sarah thought about it for a long moment. "I want to rebuild my home, but I also want to find something new, something that will bring me joy. Maybe it's time for a change." Emily's eyes lit up. What about opening a new business? You've always loved books, and the library is being rebuilt. Maybe you could open a bookstore or a cafe, a place where people can gather, read, and find comfort. Sarah's heart warmed at the idea. She had always dreamed of owning a little bookstore, a place where she could share her love of literature with others. The idea of creating something new, something that could bring happiness to the community, filled her with a sense of purpose. "That's a wonderful idea, Emily," Sarah said, feeling a spark of excitement for the first time in weeks. "I think that's exactly what I need to do." The next day, Sarah began to make plans for her new venture. She found a small, vacant building in the heart of Silverton that had miraculously survived the fire. It had once been a cafe, and though it was in need of repairs, Sarah could see its potential. With the help of Emily and some local volunteers, she began the process of transforming the space into a cozy bookstore and cafe, a place where the people of Silverton could come together, share stories, and find comfort in the simple pleasures of life. The work was hard, but it was also incredibly rewarding. As the days passed, the building began to take shape. The walls were painted a warm, inviting color, and shelves were installed to hold the books that Sarah had already begun collecting. The cafe area was small but charming, with comfortable chairs and tables where people could sit and relax with a cup of coffee and a good book. Word of Sarah's new venture spread quickly through the town, and soon, everyone was pitching in to help. Donations of books came pouring in, and local artists offered to contribute artwork for the walls. The sense of community that had always been so strong in Silverton was now even more palpable, and Sarah felt a deep sense of gratitude for the support she was receiving. One afternoon, as she was arranging books on the shelves, the door to the bookstore opened, and Mrs. Jenkins walked in. "Sarah, I brought you something," she said, holding out a small, worn book. Sarah took the book and looked at it closely. It was an old, leather-bound copy of Pride and Prejudice, one of her all-time favorite novels. She opened it to the first page, and there, written in her late husband's handwriting, was a note he had penned to her many years ago. "To my dearest Sarah, may this book bring you as much joy as you've brought into my life. Love, John." Tears filled Sarah's eyes as she ran her fingers over the words. "Mrs. Jenkins, where did you find this?" Mrs. Jenkins smiled gently. "I found it in the rubble of your home. It survived the fire, just like you." Sarah clutched the book to her chest, overwhelmed by emotion. The book was a symbol of her past, of the love she had shared with her husband, and of the strength that had carried her through the darkest times. It was a reminder that even in the face of unimaginable loss, there was still hope, still something worth holding on to. "Thank you," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "This means more to me than you could ever know." Mrs. Jenkins nodded, her eyes misty. "You've given so much to this town, Sarah. It's only right that we give back to you. This bookstore, it's going to be something special. I can feel it." Sarah smiled through her tears. "I hope so. I want it to be a place where people can find comfort, just like I've found comfort in books my whole life." As the grand opening of the bookstore approached, the excitement in Silverton grew. The entire town came together to celebrate the new beginning that Sarah had created. On the day of the opening, the bookstore was filled with friends, neighbors, and even strangers who had heard about the remarkable woman who had lost everything in a fire and had found the strength to rebuild not just her own life, but the spirit of her entire community. Standing in the middle of her bookstore, surrounded by the people she loved, Sarah felt a deep sense of peace. She had lost her home, but she had gained something even more precious, a renewed sense of purpose, a new dream to pursue, and a community that she knew would always stand by her side. As the sun set on the day of the grand opening, Sarah stood outside the bookstore, looking up at the sky. The stars were shining brightly, just as they had on that night when she had felt so lost and alone. But now, they seemed to shine with a new light, a light of hope, of new beginnings, and of the strength that comes from rebuilding not just a home, but a life. The bookstore quickly became the heart of Silverton, a place where people could come together, share stories, and find comfort in the pages of a good book. Sarah had named it the Silver Lining, a nod to both the town's name and the belief that even in the darkest times, there is always a glimmer of hope. The cafe section of the bookstore was equally popular. Emily, who had decided to stay in Silverton to help her mother, managed the cafe and ensured that it served the best coffee and pastries in town. The warm, inviting atmosphere drew in people from all walks of life, and soon the Silver Lining was bustling with activity from morning until evening. For Sarah, the bookstore was more than just a business. It was a labor of love. She spent her days surrounded by books, organizing events like author readings, book clubs, and children's story hours. The store became a place where the community could gather, connect, and heal. One evening, after closing up the bookstore, Sarah sat down in one of the cozy chairs by the window, looking out at the town she had helped rebuild. The streets were quiet now, the town bathed in the soft glow of streetlights. Silverton was not the same as it had been before the fire, but in many ways it was stronger. The people had come together in ways that Sarah had never seen before, and there was a renewed sense of unity and purpose that permeated every corner of the town. As she sat there, lost in thought, the door to the bookstore opened. Sarah looked up to see Jacob, her son, walking in. "Jacob!" she exclaimed, jumping up to embrace him. "What are you doing here?" Jacob grinned and hugged her tightly. "I couldn't stay away, Mom. I've been hearing all about what you've been doing here, and I had to come see it for myself." Sarah beamed with pride as she showed Jacob around the bookstore, pointing out all the little details that made it special. Jacob listened intently, clearly impressed by what his mother had accomplished. "This place is amazing, Mom," Jacob said as they sat down in the cafe. "I'm so proud of you." Sarah blushed, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "Thank you, Jacob. I couldn't have done it without everyone's help. This town, these people, they've given me so much." Jacob nodded, his expression serious. "And you've given them just as much, if not more. You've created something beautiful here, something that will last for years to come." Sarah smiled, but there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. "I'm happy with what I've built, but I still miss the old house, the life I had before the fire. I miss your father, Jacob. I miss him so much." Jacob reached out and took his mother's hand. "I know, Mom. I miss him too. But he would be so proud of you. He would be proud of everything you've done." Tears filled Sarah's eyes, but she smiled through them. "I like to think so. I like to think he's watching over us, seeing all of this." Jacob squeezed her hand, offering silent support. For a moment, they sat in comfortable silence, each lost in their thoughts. Finally, Jacob spoke up. "Mom, have you thought about what you want to do next? I mean, you've accomplished so much already, but I know you. You're always thinking ahead." Sarah laughed softly. "You know me too well. I have been thinking about the future. This bookstore. It's a dream come true, but I want to do more. I want to make sure that Silverton continues to grow, that we keep building on what we've started." Jacob nodded, understanding. "What did you have in mind?" Sarah took a deep breath, feeling a surge of excitement as she shared her idea. "I've been thinking about starting a community outreach program. There are still so many people in this town who are struggling to rebuild their lives. I want to create a space where they can get the help they need, whether it's finding a job, learning new skills, or just having someone to talk to. I want to give back to the community that has given me so much." Jacob's eyes lit up with admiration. "That's an incredible idea, Mom. You've always had such a big heart. I know the people of Silverton will appreciate it." Sarah smiled, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. "I hope so. I want to make sure that no one in this town feels like they're alone. We've been through so much together, and we're stronger because of it. I want to keep that spirit alive." The next day, Sarah began laying the groundwork for the community outreach program. She reached out to local businesses, civic leaders, and volunteers, rallying them to the cause. The response was overwhelmingly positive, and soon, the program was up and running. It provided resources for those who were still struggling to get back on their feet, offering everything from job training to mental health support. As the program grew, Sarah found herself busier than ever, but she also felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She was helping to rebuild not just the physical structures of Silverton, but the lives of the people who called it home. And in doing so, she was healing her own heart as well. Emily and Jacob were a constant source of support, and together, they worked to ensure that the program was a success. The bookstore continued to thrive, and it became a symbol of the town's resilience, a reminder that even in the face of unimaginable loss, there is always the possibility of renewal. Months passed, and the seasons changed, bringing new life to Silverton. The scars of the fire were still visible, but they were slowly fading as the town rebuilt itself. New homes were constructed, businesses reopened, and the community outreach program flourished. The Silver Lining became a beloved fixture in the town, a place where people gathered not just to buy books or enjoy a cup of coffee, but to connect with one another, to share their stories, and to find comfort in each other's company. For Sarah, life had taken on a new rhythm. She was busier than she had ever been, but she was also happier. The work she was doing, both at the bookstore and through the outreach program, gave her a sense of purpose that she had never felt before. She was no longer defined by what she had lost, but by what she had built. One crisp autumn morning, as Sarah was opening the bookstore, she received a letter in the mail. It was from a publishing company that had heard about the Silver Lining and wanted to feature her story in a book about communities that had overcome adversity. The letter was full of praise for what she had accomplished, and it included an offer to write a chapter about her experiences during and after the fire. Sarah was taken aback. She had never considered herself a writer, but the idea of sharing her story with a wider audience intrigued her. She thought about the journey she had been on, the loss, the grief, the rebuilding, and the community that had come together in the aftermath of the fire. It was a story that deserved to be told, not just for herself, but for the people of Silverton. That evening, she sat down at her kitchen table with a notebook and a pen, and she began to write. The words flowed easily, as if they had been waiting to be released. She wrote about the fire, about the fear and the loss, but also about the hope that had emerged from the ashes. She wrote about the people of Silverton, about their resilience and their kindness, and about the new life they were building together. As she wrote, Sarah realized that this was the final step in her journey of healing. By putting her story into words, she was not just documenting the past, but also embracing the future. She was acknowledging the pain she had endured, but also celebrating the strength that had carried her through it. When she finished writing, Sarah felt a sense of peace that she hadn't felt in a long time. She knew that she had come full circle, that she had taken the ashes of her old life and used them to build something new, something even more beautiful than what had come before. The book featuring Sarah's story was published the following year, and it quickly became a bestseller. People from all over the country were inspired by the story of Silverton and the woman who had helped to rebuild it. The book brought new attention to the town, and visitors began to flock to the Silver Lining, eager to see the place that had become a symbol of hope and resilience. Sarah was humbled by the response, but she remained focused on her work. The community outreach program continued to grow, and the bookstore flourished. Silverton had become a beacon of hope, a place where people could see the power of community and the strength of the human spirit. But even as Silverton thrived, Sarah never forgot the lessons she had learned during the darkest days of her life. She knew that life could change in an instant, that everything you hold dear can be taken away without warning. But she also knew that with love, determination, and a little bit of faith, it is possible to rebuild, to create something new and beautiful out of the ashes. As she looked out over the town she loved, Sarah felt a deep sense of gratitude. She had lost everything, but she had found something even more precious, a renewed sense of purpose, a community that she loved, and the knowledge that she had the strength to overcome anything life might throw at her. And so, as the years passed, Sarah continued to build her legacy in Silverton. She expanded the bookstore, added new programs to the outreach center, and continued to inspire those around her with her unwavering spirit. She watched as her children built lives of their own, knowing that they had inherited her resilience and determination. In the end, Sarah Whitfield's story was not just about loss and rebuilding. It was about the power of community, the importance of hope, and the belief that even in the darkest of times, there is always a silver lining. It was a story that would be told for generations, a reminder that no matter what life may bring, there is always the possibility of a new beginning. As the years went by, Sarah became a mentor and a pillar of strength for the younger generations in Silverton. People often came to her for advice, not just on books or business, but on life itself. They knew that Sarah had faced unimaginable loss and had not only survived but thrived. Her story had become a symbol of resilience, a testament to the power of hope and community. One day, a young woman named Lily walked into the Silver Lining. She was in her mid-20s, with a worn look that spoke of struggles and hardships. Sarah recognized the look in her eyes, the same look she had seen in her own reflection after the fire. "Hi there," Sarah greeted her warmly. "What brings you in today?" Lily hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I've heard about you, Ms. Whitfield. I've heard about what you did after the fire, how you rebuilt your life in this town. I need help. I don't know where else to turn." Sarah listened patiently as Lily shared her story. She had lost her job, her home, and was on the brink of giving up. She had come to Silverton on a whim, hoping to find a fresh start, but was unsure of where to begin. Sarah reached across the table and took Lily's hand. "You're in the right place, Lily. I've been where you are, and I know how hard it is. But I also know that it's possible to rebuild, to find a new path. You don't have to do it alone. We'll help you." Lily's eyes filled with tears, and she nodded gratefully. Over the next few months, Sarah took Lily under her wing, helping her find a job through the community outreach program and giving her a place to stay until she got back on her feet. Sarah's guidance and support were exactly what Lily needed to begin her own journey of healing and rebuilding. As Lily began to thrive, she found a new sense of purpose in helping others who were struggling. She became an active volunteer in the community outreach program and eventually took on a leadership role, helping to expand its services and reach even more people in need. Sarah watched with pride as Lily blossomed into a strong, confident woman. She saw in Lily the same resilience and determination that had carried her through her own darkest days. And she knew that the legacy of Silverton, the legacy of hope, community, and resilience, would continue to grow, carried forward by people like Lily. Years passed, and Sarah continued to build on the foundation she had laid in the aftermath of the fire. Silverton grew and thrived, becoming known not just for its resilience, but also for its vibrant sense of community and its commitment to helping those in need. The bookstore became a landmark, a place where people from all over came to find inspiration and connection. But for Sarah, the most important part of her journey was the sense of home she had found. The Silver Lining was more than just a bookstore. It was a home in the truest sense of the word, a place where she felt safe, loved, and at peace. And as she looked back on all that she had accomplished, she knew that she had found something even more precious than the home she had lost. She had found a new family in the community she had helped to rebuild, and she had found a new purpose in helping others. But most importantly, she had found herself, her strength, her resilience, and her ability to create something beautiful out of the ashes. One evening, as Sarah sat on the porch of her new home, a small cottage on the edge of town, built on the same spot where her old home had stood, she felt a deep sense of contentment. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden light over the town, and the air was filled with the sound of laughter and conversation from the people she had come to love. As she sat there, surrounded by the beauty of the town she had helped to rebuild, Sarah knew that she had truly found her place in the world. She had found a place where she belonged, where she was loved, and where she could continue to make a difference. And as the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Sarah smiled, knowing that she had built not just a home, but a legacy that would endure for generations to come. The story of Sarah Whitfield and the town of Silverton continued to inspire people long after the fire. The book that had featured her story became a classic, and The Silver Lining was a must-visit destination for anyone who came to Silverton. People from all walks of life came to see the place where a woman had taken her greatest loss and turned it into something beautiful. But it wasn't just the physical place that people came to see. It was the spirit of resilience that Sarah had embodied. They came to hear her speak, to learn from her wisdom, and to be inspired by her journey. Sarah often hosted events at the bookstore, where she would share her story and encourage others to find their own strength in the face of adversity. One day, a group of young students visited the Silver Lining as part of a school project. They were studying stories of resilience and had chosen Sarah's story as their focus. As they sat in a circle around her, notebooks in hand, they eagerly listened to every word she said. "What's the most important lesson you've learned, Ms. Whitfield?" one of the students asked. Sarah thought for a moment before answering. I've learned that life is full of unexpected challenges, but no matter what happens, you always have the power to choose how you respond. You can choose to give up, or you can choose to fight back, to rebuild, and to create something new. And when you do, you'll find that you're stronger than you ever imagined. The students nodded, clearly moved by her words. As they left the bookstore, one of the students turned back and said, "Thank you, Ms. Whitfield. You've inspired us to never give up." Sarah smiled, her heart swelling with pride. That's all I could ever hope for. In the final years of her life, Sarah Whitfield continued to live with the same grace, strength, and generosity that had defined her journey. She remained an active part of the Silverton community, mentoring the next generation of leaders and ensuring that the Silver Lining and the community outreach program continued to thrive. As she grew older, Sarah knew that her time was coming to an end, but she faced it with the same resilience that had carried her through the hardest times. She had lived a full and meaningful life, one filled with love, purpose, and a deep sense of fulfillment. And she had left behind a legacy that would continue to inspire and uplift others for years to come. When Sarah passed away, the entire town of Silverton came together to honor her memory. They held a celebration of her life at the Silver Lining, where people shared stories of how Sarah had touched their lives and helped them through their own struggles. It was a day filled with tears, laughter, and a deep sense of gratitude for the woman who had given so much to her community. In the years that followed, Sarah's legacy lived on in Silverton. The bookstore continued to be a place of refuge and inspiration. The community outreach program expanded its services, and the town itself grew and thrived, always remembering the woman who had helped rebuild it from the ashes. And so, the story of Sarah Whitfield came to a close, not with sadness, but with a sense of peace and fulfillment. She had taken the greatest loss of her life and turned it into something beautiful, something lasting. She had lived a life filled with love, purpose, and a deep sense of connection to the people and the town she loved. And as the years passed, the story of Sarah Whitfield became a part of Silverton's history, a reminder to all who came after that no matter what life may bring, there is always the possibility of a new beginning. There is always a silver lining. Decades after Sarah's passing, Silverton had become a symbol of resilience, a town that had faced the worst and come out stronger. People continued to visit the Silver Lining, drawn by the story of Sarah Whitfield and the town she had helped rebuild. The community outreach program, now named the Whitfield Center, had expanded to serve not just Silverton, but the surrounding towns as well. It offered a wide range of services, from job training and education to mental health support and emergency assistance. The center was a testament to Sarah's vision of a community that took care of its own, a place where no one was left behind. In the center of town, a statue of Sarah Whitfield was erected, a tribute to the woman who had given so much to Silverton. The plaque at the base of the statue read, "In memory of Sarah Whitfield, whose strength, compassion, and unwavering spirit helped rebuild this town and its people. May her legacy inspire us all to find the silver lining in every storm." And so, Sarah Whitfield's story continued to inspire, her legacy living on in the hearts and minds of those who came after her. Silverton had become a place of hope, a place where the power of community and the strength of the human spirit were celebrated every day. And in the end, that was Sarah's greatest gift to the world. The knowledge that no matter what life may bring, there is always hope. There is always the possibility of a new beginning. And there is always, always a silver lining.